Hello everybody, and welcome to my video series called Stories of My Life. This is the first episode, and I'm going to introduce exactly what this video series is going to be about. So I want to start by talking about nostalgia. Now, what exactly is nostalgia? We often hear about nostalgia, we read about it, people talk about it on the internet. To most people, at least in, by contemporary definition, the word nostalgia is often related to childhood, although more broadly it contains anything from like the past. So if you're 70 years old, your 60s and 50s will be nostalgic as well, not just your teenage years or your childhood years. When we talk about what we consider nostalgic, it's very generational, and it's usually based on the media. It's based on the music, on the TV shows, the movies, all that. Like when people talk about 80s nostalgia, you get two main different ones, but there's obviously a broad range. But the main ones are the more teenage/adult-oriented nostalgia for the 80s. And then you got the childhood nostalgia. And the childhood nostalgia for the 80s would be like watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or He-Man and playing Super Mario Bros. While the more older, like the teenage, young adult type of nostalgia for the 80s would be like the types of the bands that were popular at the time, the fashion, all that kind of trends, all that kind of stuff. The more older, the more like political it might be. Like people will talk about Ronald Reagan when they talk about not 80s nostalgia, whereas a younger person would talk about playing Atari. And likewise with 90s nostalgia, we get a lot of people will talk about like Nickelodeon shows, like the Rugrats or Cat Dog, or they'll talk about the bands and musicians that were popular back then. So nostalgia, in our the way we define it, is often based off of the media, society, culture, politics. It all varies with generation. And it's all based on the nation you're from, your personal cultural experiences, the region of wherever you're from, all that stuff. It all blends into nostalgia. But even though we often define it, especially in the contemporary times on social media and such, we define it based off of the media, like TV shows and music. I'm gonna say one thing, that nostalgia is more than just that. It's also a personal thing. Nostalgia is not just the shows that everybody of the same age group from the same country watched. Nostalgia is not just, people born within these years generally watched these shows, read these books in school, did this and that. These were the trends. Nostalgia is also the personal experiences that we all have. And I think that's kind of what really unifies nostalgia in a transgenerational way. That a person who is 90 years old and a person who's 30 years old, even though they grew up in different times, different cultural attitudes, different trends and technology and music and all that, they still will have a shared nostalgic value of their childhood and the various cultural experiences that we experience as we grow older. It doesn't matter if you're 70 or if you're 20. A lot of us will remember our first day of school or our first kiss, or we'll remember one of our birthdays that we really remember from our childhood. We remember getting grounded or in trouble with your parents. Depends. It'll vary. Like older generations were probably, like the parents were probably more likely to spank children, and newer generations, a timeout is the most common punishment. But the shared common experience of childhood is something that is timeless. Doesn't matter if you grew up in the 1920s or in the 1820s. There is a shared. It's going to vary, of course. I mean, there was a time period in America where 12-year-olds were working in factories. Thank God that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, we still have that common cultural attitude of childhood, adolescence, and we all have stories. We all have families and friends from the past and present that are all all of our relationships are held together by stories. And I want to create this series to kind of put out my stories. This isn't anything crazy. Like I'm not Marco Polo coming back to Italy talking about what I saw in China and India. I'm just a regular guy who's making a little blog about the stuff I like, the stories from my life, from my childhood to my teenhood, even stories from like last year. But these are stories that I find that are generally funny, interesting. They're nothing crazy, but they're just little stories. And I think we all have that. We all share having stories that are humorous or sometimes even a little scary, a little sad. But we all have these stories that are part of, that meld our memory and make us, who we are. Our stories shape us because these are all experiences. These are things that we learn from or we don't learn from, but then it bites us in the end. But these are all stories. Now this series will be a bunch of stories that they're generally going to be lighthearted, kind of back in when I was like 10 years old I did this and that and this and that. They're not most of these are not going to be like anything heavy. See, I want to keep the subject matter kind of light, just because I think those are the best stories to really share. Those are the stories that maybe back when it happened, it was like a tragedy, like not a huge tragedy, but like a mini tragedy. Like, oh my god, I got an F on my report card, my mom's gonna be so mad. And that's the stuff when you're little, back then, you're like, oh shit, man, this sucks. But now, 10 years later, you could laugh about it. And these are the kinds of stories that I'm gonna share. And I'm putting this on the general audience. Anyone can watch this, it's on the internet. But mostly kind of a personal thing. I want this to be something that I can share with my family mostly, for my future generations. And I think memories are one of the building blocks of who we are. Because memories are part of us. And they're a part of us that is kind of, unless you have a video or photograph, or even a sound recording, there's something that are kind of unique to us and the people who experienced it with us. Not everybody remembers the same story the same way. I could ask a friend who was in an event, hey, do you remember 5 years ago when this happened? And they're going to remember it. They're going to remember it from a different perspective, and they might not remember the same things I do, or they might remember things I don't. But I want these stories, I want to record these different stories so I could put them out there and they could just be there. Because one of the tragedies of age is that some people will succumb to, the fact that as we grow older, we increase the risk of memory loss, dementia, Alzheimer's. I mean, it's a horrible thing. It can be somewhat prevented, but not everyone can, and it's a complicated thing. If, God forbid, I ever get something like that, like dementia or Alzheimer's, I want my grandchildren or great-grandchildren to be like, hey, Grandpa, here, watch this. And it'll, in case I ever, God forbid, lose any of my memories, these stories will forever be out there. And some of these stories might be embarrassing to me, but I don't care because I just want to share this with the world. The stories I'm going to share for this first episode are going to be video game related. Now there's one thing that generations that grew up in the 80s, 90s to now have that generations that grew up before that don't. And that is a childhood on video games. Before video games were mainstream and available, kids all pretty much just played outside, or they played inside. It was with board games or card games. I come from a generation where video games were very, very popular. Now, I'm going to say it is quite different than today. As in, when I was a kid, there was a balance of outdoor play and video game play, which was very much enforced by my parents, who made sure that I could only play video games when my homework was done and that I still played outside. But I had several video game consoles growing up. I had a PlayStation 1. And one of the games I had, I actually looked it up, it was called One Extreme Race. Like, number 1, letter X, and then Extreme Race. And the game is basically, you get to choose, like, between, I believe it was, you could be a guy on a bike, you could be a guy on a, I remember there was a Lug, and I had no idea what the hell a Lug was until I played that game. And I often played as the guy in the Lug, because I think that was the easiest one to control. He was one of the fastest, too. But the game, the levels were like, I remember there was a South American level, it's like in the Amazon rainforest, and then there's a San Francisco level. It was probably the only 2 levels I ever got to play. The game had multiplayer, and at the time I was like 7 years old, so my little brother was, he hadn't even turned 3 yet, he was still 2. So the only person in the house that I could play that, was in the household was my dad. I was like 7, my dad was 32 or so, and we would play that game a lot, especially in the evening, like before bedtime. And we played 2-player and we would race each other. And then one of the controllers broke, like the analog stick. Like, I know this is a PS3 controller, but pretend it's a PS1 controller. This analog stick just completely came off. So we had one controller without one and one with one. So my dad got a little crafty, and he got a nail like this, hammered it into the hole right here where it goes, and played with the nail, and it actually worked. Only problem was it was really, really rough on the thumbs, and it kind of protruded a little higher than it should. I mean, it wasn't too bad, but it was a nail. A kind of rusty metal nail similar to this. And we would, I know logically you would think, okay, 32-year-old man and his 7-year-old son, he makes a controller that's altered with a nail because the analog stick broke. Logically, he's gonna be, since he's older, he's gonna use the rough and tough nail one and let his son use the little plastic one. Nope. We would race to the PlayStation, and whoever got there first got the good controller. I would say about 90% of the time my dad won. So most of the time I ended up using that rusty nail. And it was fun, but that thing did hurt. It made my thumb sore, my hand sore. But never bothered me. It was still fun. It was a crafty, kind of ghetto, kind of not very comfortable way to fix a problem. I mean, probably cost back then, I'd have been kind of expensive to get a PlayStation 1 controller back then. Let's say it cost about $15, $20. Might be, I don't know if I'm over or underestimating, but let's say it cost that much. That's not that much money. You could just buy a new controller. But my dad, who was very cheap and very frugal, but very crafty, decided to stick a nail inside of the analog stick. And that's a very fun memory I have. It's one of those father-son bonding memories. I'm not gonna make my kids play with a rusty nail as a control stick, but it's still kind of a fun memory to have, and I will, it's kind of thing when I have kids, I want to play video games with them and, have fun moments like that. Another little memory, little silly story. I was about the same age, 6, 7 or so. The first console I ever had was a Super Nintendo, an SNES, and the first game I played on the SNES that I owned and played on the SNES was Super Adventure Island, which is a kick-ass 2D platformer. I remember one of my fears of the game was that if I had the game paused and turned off the game system, the game would never work again. It doesn't make sense, but in the mind of a 7-year-old, that's the logic. If I press pause and then turn off the game, turn off the system, I can never play the game again. It's broken. You're only allowed to turn it off if it's not paused. That was the logic that I applied for some reason. That's one little thing. More of an anecdote than a story, but another thing is I had a game, it was called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Fighter, something like that, TMNT Fighter. It was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game. You could play as any of the turtles, you could play as Shredder. It's a fighting game. My favorite character was Armagon, who's like this shark alien thing. And then there was also War, who looked like some kind of Triceratops. I don't know if that's what he was supposed to be, but he had like a Triceratops face without all the horns. I don't remember if he had horns, but. And I remember if you look it up on YouTube, just look up the intro to the game or whatever, they have like a cutscene. And it's a Super Nintendo. It's not like the PlayStation, right? Where they actually have voices. Like you play Spyro and you hear the characters talk and you read the text. This was only the text, so I'm reading it. And I come across this word that my 7-year-old mind had never come across before. Focus. This word, focus. I had never seen that word before. I didn't know how it was pronounced. But I read that word. And you know what I thought it's supposed to... You know what I thought that word was? I thought it said fuck you. So I was reading along with the text like blah 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 blah, and I see the word focus, and I think it's fuck you. So my mouth keeps shut. And I don't know why I would think that they would say fuck you, but I thought they did in the game. I thought that was a thing, where a game that's for kids would... A Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game, a fighting turtles game, would just have the word fuck you. I didn't realize that's not how you pronounce focus. And it's not, doesn't mean the same thing. I think it was Splinter that was saying it. But that's one of those little stories I think of. It's just really silly. And I'll tell you, I never swore as a kid. I think the first time I ever cussed at all, I was like in middle school, and then I did not actually cuss on a regular basis, and even then I still don't cuss that much until I was like in 8th grade. But yeah, I thought the word focus said fuck you. I could give a lot of stories of playing video games as a kid, but they're not that interesting because it's just playing a game. I mean, they're fun to reminisce about, but I just wanted to share that little story with my dad and the nail, because I always found that, in retrospect, it's kind of messed up that he would, you know, say, oh hey son, look, I put a nail in this so you can actually play, but instead of me just using it because I'm the grown-up, how about we race? So 90% of the time you're gonna use it. It's just a funny story to look back at. It's not like my dad was mean or anything. I mean, when he was mean, it wasn't about that. That wasn't his way of being mean, that's just a way of having fun. And it's such a first world problem, like, oh, I have to use a nail for an analog stick. Yeah, that's my struggle. When I'm older, I'm gonna tell that story about how, oh, you kids have it so easy with your whatever fucking technology they're gonna have in the future. Back in my days, I had to play with a nail. Grandpa, that was just one time because your dad put... Shut up! I had to play with a nail, boy. Tough. Well, that's all the stories I'm going to share for today. I know they weren't that interesting. It's the first episode. I mostly just want to introduce why I'm doing this, what it's going to be about. I'm going to the way I'm going to plan it out, it's going to be like if I feel it's going to be a good story, I might save it for a while. And then some stories are kind of like, some stories I'll save for certain parts of the year. Like, I have a great Halloween story that I'm going to release that I'm going to record in October. So there's a lot I've got planned out. I want to see how this video series is going to go. But that's basically what it's going to be. I'm going to record this at least about once or twice a week. I'm going to try. No guarantee with work and school. But I'm trying to see I can put out as much videos, as much content as possible. I really just want to encourage anybody watching this to express their own stories. If you have a story, like, just think about all the stories from when you were growing up. Everybody has stories. Funny, sad, all kinds of stories. Now, I do want to keep this more lighthearted and humorous, but some of the stories might seem a little boring, especially if it's not something... But these are stories that, for me, are interesting because they're just funny little parts of my life, and I hope you all enjoy. And I encourage anybody watching this to, if you got a story you want to say, if you just think about funny stories in your life, if you want to make a video, if you just want to share in the comments, if you want to do whatever you want, I just encourage everybody to just think about all the little bits of our lives that we sometimes forget, and then they pop up in our mind and we're like, oh shit, I remember that. Stuff like that. I want people to be able to share that and just have fun. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Peace.